Coach, I'm going to cut right to the chase here before we get into your backstory. I read an article recently about your dad said he counted 23 fans at the first game you ever coached for Tennessee. When you think back on those crowds and what you've seen the last 2 years, and specifically this last weekend in Hoover, what does that mean to you as far as what you've built there?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of get emotional about it, to be honest with you, because I mean, anytime you go to a place, um, say it humbly, you want to leave it a better place. And, you can talk about wins and losses and things like that, but, you know, someone's won here before, someone will win here later, but you kind of want to make an impact like the coaches you saw when I was little here. Like Coach Fulmer was winning trophies, but also just like the presence he had on the sideline. It was a thing. It wasn't just a good team or a trophy. It was a thing. And then Pat Summit was that, maybe even to a greater extent, or basically just about as big of an extreme as you can get. So when you get here, or a place like Arkansas, where the whole state revolves around the university you're at, and it's more of a thing, for lack of a better word, you want to make it as good as you can, because it's what the people deserve that surround the place, but also it's what they brought you in to do. And in my particular case, it was the first school to kind of take a chance on me to have this leadership role instead of just being the guy running around watching games on the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's amazing. And in order to get to where you're at, you had to start somewhere. So, for those who don't know, Tony, where are you from?
Yeah, I'm from St. Louis. I grew up in North County there. Ferguson Florissant School District is where my mom taught. And then my dad taught at a private school, DeSmet Jesuit High. It was the first year the school was open. They moved to St. Louis because my aunt lived there, and he just needed a job. So he jumped on at a high school that had just opened. We ended up working there for 46 years. And
Wow.
it was a good drive from my house. I grew up about 35 minutes, really just with moderate traffic even. And I went to high school there with my dad and rode every day too, with him. And then depending on what was going on with sports, for him and myself, he was a coach there, and I played 3 different sports. I'd ride home with him a lot. And so it was great. That was time we maybe wouldn't get to spend together, because prior to that, it's not like he wasn't around a lot, but he was working awfully hard to make ends meet. And he's just a hustler in general. So we maybe missed out on some times together that we made up for later during my high school career. And then because of his career, and I hate to jump ahead, but maybe a question you would ask, because of his career, he was tied into University of Missouri because of recruiting. He had some great players. I wasn't one of them, but that's ultimately what got my foot in the door at University of Missouri. And I had a couple stops in college before that we could talk about, but a lot revolved around his legacy and his job and his reputation that went on in St. Louis.
Yeah, and one of the things before we get into that, man, I got a bone to pick with you. All 3 hosts on this show are St. Louis Cardinals fans, and we hear you say you're from St. Louis, and then the rumor on the street, we see the pictures, you're a Cubs fan, Tony. How is this?
So my dad's from Chicago, and he brainwashed me. We'd go visit my grandma all the time, and he took good care of her. I was never fortunate enough to meet my grandfather. I think I was born before he passed, but other than that, my dad had to go up there and take care of her a lot. It's where my uncle, his only brother, his only sibling, lived. So we'd go visit, and we'd go to the Bears games and the Cubs games all the time. And then eventually I begged my way into a Chicago Bulls game to see Michael Jordan play. It was actually Shaquille O'Neal's rookie year. So it was a pretty special game when they played the Magic. But the other thing is, at home, my dad was watching the Cubs on WGN. And back then, a lot of people don't understand, at least our players don't. Like, you had the Sunday game of the week a lot, or, a Saturday game maybe every now and then. Other than that, it was WGN and it was TNT playing the Braves. And unfortunately for me, I watched a lot of losing baseball. Some of those teams were just brutal for both clubs, but that was what was on TV. And I'm a nostalgia history guy. I mean, Wrigley Field just sucks you in. So it wasn't like I ever hated the Cardinals. You have to respect that organization. I loved going to those games. I loved Ozzie Smith. But I liked watching the Cubs with my dad. It's the ultimate father-son sport, and that's his team. So it was kind of hard to pull away from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned your dad, and you talked about the time you spent. Your relationship with him has been well documented. You said that you belong on any coaching tree. That's the one you belong on. Can you just put into words that relationship that molded you into the coach that you are and made you the leader of men you are, like he is?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the values and what I saw him do that made him successful, I try and copy. But at the same time, what I learned from some other mentors is you got to be true to who you are. So, I grew up differently, and maybe a little bit different personality from him, but overall, the values that I saw him instilling in young guys when I was sitting on the bench watching and growing up were ones that were sometimes tough to watch because he was hard on guys. He was a disciplinarian and a huge work ethic guy. But you saw how it helped people turn the corner. And then you saw how people would come back years later and say, you got me to where I'm at in my business career or my college athletic career because of what you instilled in me. And it just stuck with me. So to me, a lot of the things that I actually learned as a fan, sitting on the bench. I'd always sit next to whoever my favorite player was, that I got along with. And then I'd sit there and watch whoever my favorite player was on the field and trying to emulate what they were doing. And then at school, I'd try and copy what my dad was doing. I'd want to be the one to pick teams or make the rules or argue with the umpires or officials or anything. So it was a lot like any other son. I don't know what country song it is, but it kind of talks about how the son starts saying things the dad is and copying things he's doing. And I think every kid does it with their either father figure or whoever's looking after them. And for me, it was so many days at a soccer field, baseball field, basketball court, and that's what bled into what I do now, I guess.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, he's not the only one in the family. I want to get to, you got 3 older sisters. They always talk about how much swagger you got, Coach. Is that come from having 3 older sisters growing up?
I don't know. I think just the fact I survived that whole situation, a dad that's working really hard at work, and I'm around 3 sisters and a mom, surrounded by women. I think it made me tougher, but it also made me softer. I hate to admit it, but no, they're feisty, and they were into athletics as well, whether it be participating or cheering for. And I think something that I kind of watched how they were at games, because there were some games I couldn't sit on the bench or didn't. The loyalty piece and how you kind of approach game day and support game day. I'm not saying I do it the right way, but the way that I've always done it was kind of bred from being around them. And it truly is a sports family. My youngest sister, we just got her Christmas gift. It was Blues tickets. And I don't think she would ever want anything else. And then one of my other sisters, their family is probably the most loyal fans you can possibly have. And my oldest sister too is a great athlete and kind of tied in to my dad's job too. So my mom knows all the right things to say and do as a coach's wife, which is a very tough life to lead. So without sounding overly cliche, which is what coaches do, it's a family affair. And I was the youngest. So kind of like my youngest niece that knows way too much about life at way too young of an age. She learned it from everybody that's in the family that's older. I was younger and looking up to everybody. And fortunately, I had some good examples and role models, if you want to call them that, to learn from.
Yeah, shout out to your mom. We've seen, some articles where you've said she was the glue that held the family together, and we can only imagine how hard it is raising your kids. And like you said, your father's coaching all the time. But I'm gonna ask you an honest question, since you said they were athletes. Who was the most athletic sibling?
That is a tough one. Oh man, and they'll hate me for it, but I got it. I don't think it was me. I think it was the oldest. Christine, Katie, and Kara are my sisters in that order. And Christine, the oldest one, might have been the most athletic. And I'll be dang if they're all not incredibly competitive. And in 3 different ways, definitely 3 different personalities. But they kind of match my father's intensity. And for me, it was like, I better keep up with these folks, even if it's just watching a game on TV or watching one of the games my dad is coaching or my sisters are participating in. It was a high level of intensity and had to learn how to keep up and, kind of learn too, to hate losing. When there was a loss in the family for whoever it was, it wasn't like no one was allowed to eat, but it was a different vibe in the air. And so I think that's something that kind of stuck with me too.
So, you mentioned that your athletic career wasn't the biggest, and, we talk about, your siblings, but everybody knows you for a coach. But, give me just right off the top of your head, what was your favorite playing moment as an athlete?
I think for me, I was always going to be a role player, no matter where I was at. And so I went from a Jesuit school at the NAIA level, because that was kind of the level I belonged recruiting wise, to a junior college because I was envious of being at a big school. And, I had always played against like Jason Worth, and I played with a couple big leaguers. I wasn't a great player, but I was always kind of at the highest level of competition. And I wanted to seek that out. But I also know deep down, as far as you're going to get might be the furthest you can get in your coaching career. There's not many, NFL head coaches that weren't in the NFL, or MLB managers might be a better example, that were not big leaguers themselves. So I wanted to get to kind of that higher level. And so I'm a role guy at Missouri, pinch run, defensive replacement. But in my junior year, I started the final game of the year against Texas A&M. And, I always beat myself up in front of our players for not being a good player. I was pretty good that day for whatever reason. The stars aligned, and my dad was there, and see kind of the enjoyment on his face afterwards, or the pride. And then it was just also the feeling for me. I was always in the back of my mind, like, when's this hard work going to pay off? Everyone says it pays off. And, I was fortunate enough to be a part of some great teams and play a bunch of sports. And I played at a big school, Missouri. So it's not like it was terrible, but when's kind of my moment in the sun? And that was a brief one, and one that maybe no one even else noticed besides me and my dad that day. But it was a good day for me, for sure. And it was kind of the end of the year. So it was close the book on this particular year. It was a good feeling.
Yeah, no doubt. Sounds like a blast. Well, I got one more question, and I'll let Randy get into all things coaching. We talk about the coaching tree between you and your dad. Of all the players you've had the privilege of coaching, who would you say is the most likely to follow in your footsteps and be a head coach one day?
Oh man. I think right now, fortunately I'm coaching with some guys like Coach Elander, our third base coach. Richard Jackson was a reliever for us. He's the bullpen coach. Luke Bonfield's our player development. I coached him at Arkansas. Our infield student coach is Ricky Martinez. All these guys are studs, but if you're going to go straight from the question of player right now, Evan Russell was an outfielder for us, converted into a catcher, and he's kind of our Jake Taylor. I mean, he's the older guy. He can hit, he leads. The catching part has really gotten good because he's worked at it, but really he's effective behind the plate because of his leadership abilities. And I know he's kind of always said he wants to coach one day, and I think he's really good with media. He's really good at handling freshmen, kind of being on them, but also putting an arm around them. So that's a name that sticks out for sure.
Absolutely. We agree. We've had Evan on here many times. He's been more than generous with his time. But Coach, going back into your playing career, you had your shining moment, right? Then you kind of go right into coaching at Missouri. So how much did it mean to you to coach where you played and also under your former coach in Jameson?
Yeah, no, that meant a lot because basically what I did was ask if I could coach. And he said no. And then I said again, well, why not? And this was a separate, time that I went into the office. He's like, you're not going to coach the guys you just got done playing with. That's not going to work. And then I wrote a very heartfelt letter, and he caved. And so he was a guy that gave me an opportunity. Now, granted, that opportunity was, hey, you can come out, but any one day we might tap you on the shoulder and tell you we don't need you around anymore. And that tap never came. So I was appreciative for the initial opportunity, him sticking with me just because I was a hard worker, and then the opportunity to coach. So I wanted to give everything possible back to him. But also, I think it worked out kind of in a unique way. I was already throwing BP to our guys because I was a bench guy. I was watching the game from the bench. I was able to steal signs from Iowa State back when they had a program. So I was kind of already trying to help in some way. And now I was all of a sudden thrown into a position where I know I can help. And so I was trying to do as much as possible all at once. And I think ultimately it kind of won over Coach Jameson enough that he put me into that full-time role only a year later, because that opened up in a quirky fashion. So one frustrating thing, and I'm kind of bouncing around, kids I coach now, like Evan Russell or these other guys I mentioned, they look at my situation and they're like, well, I kind of want to do what you're doing. Well, I wouldn't be where I'm sitting now if that first 2 years didn't work out the way it did. Just flat out luck. And it was just a really goofy set of circumstances. But I did get that opportunity. And I don't want to say like I got it and ran with it. What I did was I just wanted to give back as much as possible and finally contribute, because I wasn't the starting shortstop when I was playing. And in a weird way, it got me the full-time job. And then it made the first year of the full-time job go pretty well. And I was able to kind of build or stack on top of that.
So, Coach, what you're saying is Evan needs to write a heartfelt letter to you to get a job on the staff. So you would hire Evan Russell at some point, is what I'm hearing, but we can move on.
Sure. No, I would hire him to, maybe if I owned a pizza place, maybe to spin the pizzas around a little bit. No, that's an inside program joke that we talk about stuff like that. But Evan doesn't need to write with his letters because his mouth is always going at practice and everywhere else. So I got all the info I need from him.
Absolutely. So obviously, you leave Mizzou, you spend 3 years at TCU under Schloss, who's obviously killing it at Texas A&M now, including the transition into the Big 12. Kind of talk about what was that transition like for you guys going into the Big 12, into that program?
What was strange for me was I went there and it was a year in the Mountain West, and the Big 12 at the time I was at Missouri it was just marauders around every corner. I mean, both Kansas schools had new coaches. Coach Hill and Coach Price were killing it. And those are supposed to be, along with Missouri, the worst teams in the league. And then Nebraska is the furthest north, but Coach Van Horn had that thing into a monster. So the league was insane. And then you go to the Mountain West and it was a total different vibe to it. You play teams twice. You're on the West Coast. It was just completely different. And it was a little bit of a strange adjustment. And the other thing was TCU was rolling so good. It was almost like, hey, we're not supposed to lose any games. And you just came from a league where any game you actually won was like time to pop the champagne. So it was different. And then you go back into the Big 12, but it's a new league. So the whole set of circumstances was very unique over the course of 3 years there. And to be honest with you, the first couple of years, my head was buried so deep in the sand of recruiting. I think it doesn't matter who you are as a coach or who left or how good of a program it is, when there's change, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough on everybody. And, I had to get to work on that deal. And that's where I spend a ton of time, I should say. But overall, it was interesting kind of seeing going away from the Big 12 and then getting back in, but yet the league was new, because there is a lot to knowing the league. And I don't think I would have got this job if I hadn't worked at Arkansas prior to here. When you know the league, you kind of know what to expect, you know how to navigate through it. And every league in college is good, but also every league in college is unique. So I think it was interesting kind of basically being in three different leagues and over the course of 4 seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Dave Van Horn. You spent your time at Arkansas, even as a College World Series appearance. Obviously, you've given credit to that, but what does that set you up for the job you have now? Obviously, but maybe specifically, what about that sets you up for your success now?
Everything. I think my dad taught me how to be as a person. And again, that's far from perfect. I think he taught me how to treat other people. And then Coach Jameson kind of basically did the same thing, but at the college level, especially the how to treat people part. I mean, you talk about integrity at the highest level, but Coach Van Horn, more than anyone, taught me winning baseball, championship level baseball at the college level, and in particular in this league. And that's, I can get more wordy on it, but I feel like I'm trying to make as gross or as much of a blanket statement as possible for everything, whether it's pregame or things to do at the beginning of the year that you wouldn't do at the end, or vice versa. So much of it came from being around him, and it was great. I mean, I asked questions at times, but really all it was just kind of watching and learning. And the funny thing is I get the job and immediately all these coaches want to know, all right, what's the secret sauce? What's going on over there? Blah, blah, blah. And my answers were incredibly boring. because it's it's the genius is in the simplicity type of thing, but he's very dynamic at those simple things.
No, absolutely. So fast forward a little bit, you talked about getting the job at Tennessee. I think that was actually in the fall of 2017 for the 2018 season. But why Tennessee and why then?
Yeah, I think at the time I was at probably mentally the best place I'd ever been as a coach. I finally got my roots in Fayetteville. I really liked the people that I worked with. It's hard to not like the stadium and the fan base, and you're competing for championships, and the recruiting, which was so important in my life, I finally felt like I knew what I was doing a little bit. And it was kind of settled. Like, we're losing Andrew Benintendi, but we were bringing in Dominic Fletcher, and, not everybody was as good as those two guys, but it was organized, and I felt peace of mind. And now the world kind of turns upside down on me with this opportunity. But I had been dying to be a head coach really for over a decade. And a lot of people assume because you're at a bigger school or your salary is decent, you don't want to go down a level. But I had gotten to a point where I was hungry for any opportunity to be a head coach. And I think the Tennessee one came about in a unique fashion because normally a lot of people will say it's not what you know, but who you know. Well, I'm like, I don't know anyone at Tennessee. That's great. That job's open. I'm not going to waste time on that when I've got work to do at Arkansas. But it come to find out, I had recruited someone who had became an administrator here, and we had a relationship. I worked with an academic coordinator for baseball that I worked with at Missouri, and then another administrator I'd worked with at Missouri. And the AD, John Curry, had a tie to two people that are very important in my life that were mentors in baseball. So now, not one big connection, but there's 5 or 6 small ones, and they kind of start to click. And it was crazy how it went down. A local reporter just wrote an article on how fast and again how quirky it was, a 24-hour turnaround period basically, that I'm out on this field, out that way, giving press conference.
Oh, absolutely. So another thing that I've noticed about you, and I think as a whole at Tennessee, you've been on the sideline, football, basketball, dressed up even. How important it is that you think to buy into not just baseball, but as a whole in Big Vol Nation, is that for not just you, but for football and for everybody to buy into each other?
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes from DeSmet, where my dad taught. I mean, he was always helping with fields and events and working the scores table for basketball and announcing at football games. And so that was what you did. Like if you worked there, you weren't the baseball coach who also teaches. And those are the two things you do. It was you're a part of the school and in every way, shape, or form. And so that's something that I admired and something I wanted to do and something I feel like I did when I was a student there. But then you get thrown into this recruiting coordinator position at a young age when you don't know what you're doing and you're constantly trying to make up for lack of experience with effort. I never could do that before. But now it's a good thing in this position because you need to get out in the community and you need to interact with people. And, fortunately I'm blessed with Coach Elander beating up the phone in the road as much as I used to. So, that's in my mind how it all comes together. And knowing Tennessee a little bit from when I was little, again, I mentioned Pat Summitt's name and some of the other things. You better be a part of that, the way that it's not just me, it's the other coaches and other people here, because that's what's required. It's a very unique place. It's impossible to say we're the best or we're the 5th best, or it's a very, very unique place and it's a special place. So it's a requirement, in my opinion.
Well, I'm biased, but you guys are the best because I've been a Tennessee fan my whole life.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, your first year, you have players that even some of these newfound Tennessee fans would probably know, like Luke Lipschitz, Evan Russell, and they made mention in some articles and on here with us that you're kind of the laughing stock of the SEC. So tell us what the vision for you was from the beginning, and did you see it happen in the way it has so fast?
I think the vision was we better first of all, we wanted to, and when I say we, it was me and Frank were the first 2 guys right away, our pitching coach, Coach Anderson. We wanted to win right away or be competitive right away just for mental peace of mind. But also, like, you better get in the fight right away because in this league, if you're down, someone's going to look to kick you and punch you, and you may never get back up. So we wanted to make some sort of progress. And there wasn't any one great strategy. But I think eventually what we start talking about here in the office is we want to be better in the spring than what we are in the fall as a team. Yeah, it's for everybody, but we talked about it a ton. And then year 2 definitely needs to be better than year 1. And it was just kind of that improvement thing. And again, maybe we didn't do it on purpose, but maybe a little bit of that as a carryover from what I was talking about with Coach Van Horn is, we try to keep it simple, but we also try to do simple better, I guess, as the t-shirt says, or whoever.
Keep it simple, stupid, the KISS method.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of stupid, trust me, up here in the office, but at least we have fun.
Absolutely. So, Coach, after the pinnacle so far this season, we hope it's not the pinnacle of the whole season, but you start talking, get a little emotional, and we all love to see it. You start talking about guys that not only on the team, but you mentioned Evan, you mentioned Pavoloni, Liam Spence, Max Ferguson, those guys. Talk about how guys like them and Evan Russell have really helped create the culture that you and Anderson and Elander and everybody's kind of made in Knoxville.
Yeah, I think they've done statistically a tremendous job. And then they've done the old locker room thing that anyone who's been on a good team, heck, even in the Little League, in Little League ball, you got a guy that can maybe affect the others around him. Mm-hmm. But the biggest thing for me is I've learned from those guys and what's going to work here at this particular place, what's not. I've gotten feedback from those guys. And it reminds me of my first year of coaching, the year that I begged to be the volunteer. Ian Kinsler transfers in. And Ian does things with a little bit of West Coast swagger and a different this and that. And I'm here. And at first it came off as arrogance to me. Well, my inexperience with confidence showed. I didn't know what true confidence looked like. And Ian, I've never told this to Ian. He's the first person that ever really taught me what true confidence was. Coaches gave me, bits and pieces of it. But I learned from that kid a lot. He's not a kid anymore. He's a potential Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
But I would say similar things about those guys, even now that it's a couple decades removed from Ian. I've learned from those guys and they've affected the program. So that's what I was kind of trying to express in the interview that I think you're talking about.
No, absolutely. So obviously you talked about getting better year over year. Last year, 50 wins, make the trip to the College World Series in Omaha. Doesn't go the way you want it to. And a lot of people now coming into the season, Jim and I did some, we did some write-ups, and people have revisionist history now saying, oh, we knew this was coming. We saw it, but they didn't, Coach. We were reading it. We kept the receipts. They had y'all ranked around 20th. Nobody was picking y'all to win the SEC. So what was your message to the team, not just after last season? It was hard seeing guys leave like Pavs and those guys, but more so, hey, guys, we got to move on. What was the message coming in, and what was the goal? Was it still College World Series or bust?
I think there's always different things that come up throughout the year, but to encapsulate them into one thing, I think the 21 group was a lot of bitterness of 2020 being taken away from us. And we had guys like Garrett Crochet. So it's like, it almost kind of hurt us at times. Like we were trying to play 2 great seasons in one. But it did drive us a little bit in 21. And 21 became such a beloved team that this 22 group was like, let's take the strengths of that team and kind of embed them in what we're going on, but let's go out of our way almost to be this year's team, not last year's team. And even though there's some carryover, I mean, Drew Gilbert, hits a big home run. He's still on the team. Evan Russell changes positions, but he's still on the team. So I think a lot of it was let's take the identity, or let's make the identity the 2022 group. And yeah, let's uphold the standards that have, maybe been thrown out by the 21 team, as well as all the lessons learned.
Yeah, I'm going to take the opinion of guys, especially who got drafted as high as they did and played for you. We had Pavoloni and Chad Dallas and Liam Spence on an episode after the season. And those guys came on here and said that they expected this team to be better than last year's team. And that's a lot coming from guys who are leaving the team. So we held that when we were doing our projections, because we admire those guys, especially, you were talking about the leadership. Whatever Pavoloni says, I'm locked in. You sell me. But, obviously, congratulations on the success so far. The job's not done. We know that. But before we let you go, we got a quick little game that we play with every guest. I got some of the questions from your current and former teammates. So you down to play real quick before we let you go?
Yeah, no doubt. Bring it on.
All right. So it's very simple. It's this or that. We give you 2 options. You pick one or the other. You just don't say neither. You just don't say both. You ready?
Okay.
All right, this one came from Evan Russell. He said, would you rather go on vacation with Max Ferguson or Liam Spence?
Liam Spence, because I'm going to Australia, baby, and he's going to be, I jokingly say interpreter, but he's going to be my tour guide, and that's really going to happen one of these days. I've been once, but it was a short trip. I want to go back.
Absolutely. That sounds like a blast. I'm down with you on that one. So who would you say has more style? Would you rather have Beck's hair or would you rather have Kirby's mustache?
But Kirby's hair it kind of throws the question off a little bit because of that hair Kirby has going.
Pretty legit.
That I'm gonna side on the fans that I love so much. They go nuts when Kirby comes in the game. So I'm gonna have to maybe say Kirby in that deal.
Which I'm going to have to throw Pavoloni under the bus because all your players this year have came on this show and said that they pay attention to the swagger you have. Pav's tried to say that he's never paid attention or noticed it before. And so he was just straight lying.
He lied to us, coach.
Pav is all business. There's no flair for Pav. He's forge ahead at all times, full speed.
No doubt. So is the glass half full or is it half empty?
It's always half full. It is always half full. There's no doubt about it.
No doubt. All right. Your boys can only keep one of these for their celebration when they hit a home run. The daddy hat or the fur coat. Which one goes? Which one stays?
Oh, man. I think if you're going to hopefully the fans aren't listening. The fur coat's a little over the top. And I realize we're in a new era of baseball where guys flip bats and celebrate doubles and stuff like that. But the fans are relentless when I go on the road or I'm at an airport about the daddy hat. They absolutely love it. So I think that's why it kind of had to stay this year, even though this group wanted to be unique. So they added something to it. So we'll go with the foundation as opposed to the icing on the cake.
I don't think the fans are going to get mad because most of your players said the same thing. Randy, if I'm not mistaken, only Trey said he'd keep the fur coat, right?
Yeah, it's true. Coach, I got a question for you, a little off topic. How bad does that fur coat smell?
It's starting to get a musk, and it's also starting to get a texture. I don't want to say crusty, but it's got some sort of. I can't hit a home run. I couldn't even when I was in better shape. But if you notice me in the dugout, I'll steer clear of that thing because I don't want to smell it. And I don't. Now we're getting to the point where it doesn't need to be touched by anybody.
No doubt. So, all right. Would you rather go to a sporting event or a concert?
A concert. Hands down. I mean, it's a great adrenaline rush when the sporting event and everybody's on the same page, but I'm a big music fan and I don't get to do that as often as the sporting stuff. But
so what's the one concert you'd go to right now?
Oh man. I'll tell you what, Luke Combs' voice is insane. I wouldn't mind seeing that again. So, but I like all kinds of music types, so I could bounce around all over the place, but First Instinct is usually a good answer.
You're going to miss Morgan Wallen at the block party Friday. You're going to be busy.
I was like, my sister hit me up with that. So I texted him. He's a fan of all sports. So I think we got some fake news there, but.
Oh, no.
Breaking
news.
I mean, we can certainly set up an iPod and blare it over some speakers.
I actually knew that already, Randy. I'm surprised you missed it on Twitter, but I
had heard that too.
Now, would you rather have massive success by accident or modest success on purpose?
Again, I got to go back to that sign of, I always looked at a hard worker will soon succeed sooner or later. Sorry, I'm trying to spit it out fast, but basically I would want to see, the fruits of the labor a little bit. So I'll take modest results. To me, the journey or the work ethic and the stuff like that is stuff you better enjoy because there's only 56 game days, but there's a lot of practice days.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So these last two questions, these are the tough ones. You've gotten all the softball questions. Coach, would you rather save 100 strangers or one loved one?
Whew. That's tough, but loyalty's in the blood for Italians. So I don't want those 100 people getting harmed, but they got a lot of numbers there. They can fend for themselves a little bit. I'm saving my guy.
I'm with you.
All right. This last question is our staple question, and I'm interested because of basically what all your players have said in regards to this question. Would you rather spend 10 years in a coma or 5 years in prison?
Oh, man. There actually was an article about what it's like to be in a coma, and I didn't click on it and read it. So I could have a more educated answer here.
We don't want that. We want straight from the hip.
I'm going to go 5 years in prison. I'm going to do like Leonardo DiCaprio in Departed. I'm going to do some push-ups, maybe get in a little better shape, make some friends on the inside, and then celebrate life when I get out.
Yeah, most of your guys have said that they would take prison, but we don't believe them. Some of them are a little too pretty. I don't know, Coach. I'm not a believer.
Yeah, Trey ain't wearing that fur coat in prison. I can tell you that.
No doubt. Well, we appreciate your time. We know you're a busy man. Like we said, best of luck this week. And, man, go get them, Coach.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Coach.
You bet. Take care.